As we were saying in the last video, there are different perspectives or ways of judging whether something is ethical. The three that we're going to concentrate on are consequentialist approaches, or approaches that focus on the judging something ethically based on the outcome or consequences. Deontological approaches, or those that focus on what you're doing or how you're doing it, not the consequences of it. And the third one, virtue-based ethics, which asks a different question. It asks, what would an ethical person do? So it's trying to judge ethics by what an ethical person would do, given the decision or action before them. So the first two are looking at the act, the decision or actual behaviour. The last one is focused on the person doing the act or decision. So there's a big distinction there in the fundamental question that they're asking. In this video, we're going to have a look at the first consequentialist approach, ethical egoism. So ethical egoism is one of the consequentialist approaches. These consequentialist approaches try to determine what is moral basically via predicting and analysing the outcome or the consequences of the action or decision. And if the consequences of the action or decision are good, it's considered ethical. If the consequences are bad, it's considered unethical. Really, you might think of it like the maxim, the ends justifies the means. So the consequences are what matter, not how you achieve them. We're going to deal with two. The first one, ethical egoism, is question whether it's even an ethical approach. I'll get to that. And the second is the classic utilitarianism. So why don't we begin with ethical egoism? So the main claim of ethical egoism, that the moral action is the one that maximises your long-run self-interest. It's really important. Long-run self-interest. Now, if you really want to get detailed, we don't need to get this detailed in understanding, but there are even within ethical egoism, there's two kinds. A personal egoist contends you should act in your own interests, whereas impersonal egoists, which is a more philosophical position, believes that everyone should act in their own interests. Now, the fundamental idea here is that if everyone acts in their own interest, everyone will be better off. Right? Think of a market. You can either dictate, if we think of a market, you can either dictate what is bought and sold, right? And so you've got to predict what people want and how much they want of everything, and we know that our systems are pretty bad in that. Or if you let people buy what they want, act in their self-interest, we actually end up with a much more efficient and better system. So it's an extension of this idea. So how does an ethical egoist go about an analysis? To simplify, imagine you have a binary decision or action. So you've got option A and you've got option B. And so what you've got to think about is just a classic cost benefit. If I do option A, what are the positives for me? And what are the negatives? And if there are more, and then I do the same for option B, look at the positives and negatives, right? And if I work out that in actual fact, option A is the most positive for me, then that's the thing I should do. And further, under each of these theories, what it means is I am ethically obliged to do it. I would be unethical to do option B because the framework is telling me this is what's ethical. So the only correct moral choice is the one with the net positive benefits maximised for me. Okay, so it's quite a simple idea, but there's often some misconceptions in it, right? So ethical egoism is not about hedonism. It's not about saying, oh, I should eat burgers today and go out and get drunk tonight because that's going to make me feel good, right? No, that's hedonism. See, the issue is you have to look at the long-term consequences. So if I continually eat burgers and fast food each night and drink all night, etc., if I do those kind of things, it's probably going to have negative consequences on my health, on my career, on my relationships. So in actual fact, in the long run, that's negative. And an ethical egoist would say, no, you shouldn't be eating burgers and drinking heavily each night. So there's this misconception. You have to think of the long-term consequences. The second key misconception that can occur is people might say, that means everyone under this framework would be deceitful, for instance, lying. Because if you could get ahead by lying, right, then the consequences are positive for you, so therefore you'll lie. Yes, that is true. That's what the theory says. But what you have to think about is that in life, we live a repeat game, not a one shot. So if you lie all the time, what's going to happen? People won't trust you. You'll end up with a net negative consequence. And in fact, there are particularly some professions, auditing, in policing, like in areas where you actually get a huge benefit from people being able to trust you. So if you're in that kind of profession, you might end up never lying just because your reputation has so much of a positive consequence for you. So ethical egoism is not so much saying that people will never cooperate, people will never be honest, etc. It's actually saying, no, people do those things because it's of benefit to them. And that's when it becomes ethical. So I think you need to think a little bit more deeply about this than what you might think it means at first blush. Because it doesn't mean always taking the easy option or the short-term win. In fact, ethical egoism can lead to self-sacrifice so that you get ahead in the long run. So each of these theories has positives and benefits. What can we learn from ethical egoism? Ethical egoism does recognise the idea that we're important, and you are, right? Your moral choices should take your own well-being into account. It also reflects the idea that you know what's best for you. That's fairly accurate too. Sometimes, not so much, but in general, that's true. And it also tells us that people acting in their own self-interest is compatible with working cooperatively. This underpins many ideas of markets, etc., that we rely on and that have brought a huge amount of positivity to the world. So we can see that there are some things to learn from ethical egoism, some things that are true. At its utmost, there'd be people like Ayn Rand is a classic who's written around this idea, often libertarians, basing their ideas on we're all better off if we act in our own self-interest because things are more efficient, we don't have people telling us what to do, there's a whole lot of positives that flow from it. But there are also some big problems, right? At its core, you could argue that ethical egoism is in conflict or contradicts the very essence of our definition of morality, because it totally ignores the impact on others. It's about you. So it's partial and biased, and it prioritises you over everyone else. That means it's entirely subjective, and it's a matter of taste or opinion, or as we discussed last week, it's about your preferences. As a result, it can often ignore blatant wrongs. For instance, if it's good for you that there's racial discrimination in the workplace, then you're justified in doing it, etc. So you end up with some quite perverse outcomes in how we might traditionally think about what is ethically correct. As I said, each of these theories is going to have some positives and negatives. And ethical egoism is the first. Ethical egoism is a little bit different because I think we can mix it up with psychological egoism. So when economists make the assumption that people act self-interestedly, they're not making an ethical prescription. That's what they believe is factually correct. So that's a descriptive theory. And we would say that's more psychological egoism, because we're saying, the economists are saying this is what people do. They're not saying that is the right thing to do. They're just saying if we want to plan a system, this is what people do. So we've got to plan a system for it. Not that's right. So you have to distinguish this descriptive psychological egoism theory from what we're talking about. Ethical egoism, as a moral philosophy, says the morally right thing to do is what's good for you. And of course, even the psychological egoism theory, that descriptive theory, is not entirely accurate. Some people will make huge sacrifices. For instance, some people will risk their lives and die trying to help strangers. That doesn't fit even into the descriptive theory of psychological egoism. So all of these theories are not entirely accurate. They're generalizations when we're talking about descriptive theories, even then. But again, we need to distinguish it from the moral theory, which is telling us what we should do. So ethical egoism is saying what you should do is act in your own self-interest. That's the only ethical thing to do.